All right, so I covered the Halloween franchise. I did a recap of all the movies in that series a couple weeks ago, and I decided it'd be fun to do another horror franchise recap while it's still October. And I decided I'd cover Friday the 13th and all of those movies. Obviously, this is going to have some pretty major spoilers, so if that's a problem for you, don't watch. So, starting with the first movie, which was released in 1980 and titled Friday the 13th, of course. It was a very low budget whodunit type story that started off in 1958, and it shows two counselors at the Crystal Lake camp who are about to do the deed in a secluded area being killed by an unseen perpetrator. Most of the movie's murders are from the point of view of the person carrying out the crimes to conceal their identity from the audience. Then, just over 20 years later, give or take, they're planning to fix up the camp again and reopen it for the first time since that double murder. And it's revealed fairly early on in the movie that in 1957, a boy who we are to understand was special needs in some capacity drowned while attending the camp because the camp counselors weren't paying attention, and it is speculated that the counselors were engaging in lewd acts while the drowning happened. Eventually, most all of the counselors who are fixing up the camp are taken out by the mystery person over the course of the movie until their identity is revealed to the final girl, who happens to be named Alice. And the final girl is a big thing in horror movies, look it up. So this woman named Pamela Voorhees, who explains that she was the mother of Jason Voorhees, the boy who drowned in 1957 at the camp. She basically just says that she's been committing these crimes as revenge against the people who work at the camp to prevent something like this from happening again. Alice manages to kill Mrs. Voorhees by decapitating her, and for some reason decides to climb into a rowboat immediately after in the middle of the night. And as she just kind of drifts in the lake until daybreak, a grotesque undead person we are to believe is actually Jason Voorhees emerges from the water to attack her, only for it to be made to seem like a dream where she wakes up safe in the hospital bed, but she's pretty sure that Jason is still out there, and she's like, oh no, he's still alive. The first movie is pretty fun despite its low budget. There's some pretty cool effects, actually. I've looked them up before and seen behind the scenes how they do them. It's actually pretty interesting. Also, Kevin Bacon is in this movie. It's one of his first major roles, so that's pretty exciting. So it's important to remember that for the most part, there's very little carryover from movie to movie in this series. Not that there's none, but very little. They're mostly set at or near camps, usually Crystal Lake, but not always. It's kind of dumb. With the exception of the first and fifth movies, Jason is the main antagonist of these movies. So Friday the 13th Part 2 starts with Alice from the first movie being killed by who everyone assumes is Jason after she finds his mother's head in her fridge. 5 years later, campers at Crystal Lake are taken out by Jason, who actually wears a burlap sack for a mask in this one. And we actually see his gross face, especially at the end of the movie, but he gets away without being caught. And then after that movie, we have Friday the 13th, 3D or Part 3, whichever you prefer. It was actually shot using this primitive, but at the time, very exciting new 3D tech. And there were a lot of really stupid shots in this movie that only exist for the benefit of those who see it in 3D. It takes place at a cottage on Crystal Lake, and Jason finally gets his hockey mask after taking it off of a victim. This movie ends with Jason taking an axe to the skull and being seen lying there in this barn, I think. Sounds like he just needed to walk it off, honestly. I don't know what his big deal was. A little dramatic. For Part 4, which is called the final chapter, because, Jason is taken to the morgue in this one after the incidents of the third movie, and he was basically just, not dead, and so he escapes cold storage at the morgue and begins another rampage. Corey Feldman plays a young boy named Tommy Jarvis, who has an affinity for making scary masks. Corey Feldman was really popular in the 80s. He's a known name, he was pretty popular in his day. So anyway, Tommy seemingly unalives Jason at the end of this movie with a machete to the side of Jason's head, but Tommy's pretty clearly traumatized by the whole experience. I mean, he's pretty young. And so this is kind of the first major misstep of this series. Part 5, which is called A New Beginning, has a brief appearance by Corey Feldman at the start portraying young Tommy, and then it tells the tale of how a grown-up Tommy is in a psychiatric institution because of his trauma, and he's basically just having all these nightmares about Jason and shit. And it was supposed to be the first in this new trilogy where a new hockey masked bad guy takes over Jason's activities, basically. But this movie was super not well received by audiences. They wanted their Jason, and despite minor success at the box office, they decided, let's not do this. So Part 6, Jason Lives, It shows Tommy and a friend, grown up Tommy, going to unearth Jason's body and cremate it to hopefully stop Tommy's nightmares. But when he angrily pokes Jason with a fence post, lightning strikes the fence post and is conducted into Jason's body and reanimates Jason as pretty much a superhuman undead person. So that kind of opens a lot of doors for the future of this franchise. A sheriff who knows Tommy's history repeatedly arrests him in this one and assumes he's responsible for the things Jason's been doing. The sheriff's daughter, Megan, has a thing for Tommy, but doesn't 100% believe him in what he says about Jason, because Jason's basically considered like an urban legend. Like, most people don't believe he's real. So the movie ends with Tommy and Megan managing to somehow chain Jason to a boulder and leave him helpless but alive in the bottom of Crystal Lake. So part 7, The New Blood, is commonly known as Jason versus Carrie or some iteration of that. This is where a girl named Tina with psychokinetic abilities similar to the Stephen King character Carrie uses her powers and accidentally unalives her alcoholic stepdad and later wishes to have him back. But when she's trying to, use her powers to bring him back, she unwittingly awakens Jason at the bottom of the lake. This was also the first of 4 films where Kane Hodder portrayed Jason. He was pretty popular with the fans for his commitment to his performance as Jason in each of these movies. I want to say he had stunt experience, or he really was able to do a lot more exciting stunts. But anyway, the 7th movie ends with Tina finally managing to secure Jason back at the bottom of Crystal Lake. And so now part 8 comes, and it's called Jason Takes Manhattan. And I know what you're thinking. Man, that sounds like it'd be pretty fucking cool. Jason stalking through NYC, taking people out for a whole fucking movie instead of another misadventure at a fucking lake. Well, the movie clocks in at about an hour and 40 minutes, and great news, over an hour of that time is spent on a ship traveling to NYC, and better yet, very few scenes were actually shot in New York City because of budget limitations, so most of what we see is actually in Vancouver in Canada, and in no way could that possibly be disappointing to audiences. This is also the most phoned in of all of the installments, with a lot of moments that don't make sense or have zero attention to detail. There's just so much stuff that, there's no logical way this stuff could happen. So after this 8th movie, the Friday the 13th franchise is sold to New Line Cinema. They released the 9th movie, which is called Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, which starts with an ambush of Jason by authorities, resulting in them thinking that he's just gone for good. But wait, there's more. Get this, the coroner finds his still beating heart and decides to just go right ahead and eat it for some reason. Jason's spirit enters the coroner by this bizarre process of the coroner eating the heart. And then basically this movie is just about how Jason's spirit is jumping from one body to another, allowing him to continue doing these deeds like killing people, but with other people's bodies. So essentially, he has to transfer his spirit to someone in his bloodline to resurrect himself permanently, so he's not just temporarily occupying bodies. And also, this bounty hunter guy figures out that the people in his bloodline are actually the only ones who can permanently kill Jason because reasons. Oh, also, this girl who is related to him also has to use a magic dagger on him at one point after Jason's heart has turned into an infant demonic creature, which you can see on the poster of this movie. Let me just... I probably put it back there. I'm trying to anticipate what I'll edit this to do. So I know what you're thinking. Brandon, these movies have all sounded so amazing and well written. How many of them have swept the Oscars? So anyway, this movie ends with Jason being sent to hell by this girl who is related to him. But the big surprise ending is that when a dog digs up Jason's mask, we hear Freddy Krueger laugh and his hand snatches Jason's mask and pulls it into hell, which is a tease of a crossover movie because New Line Cinema owns the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, which Freddy Krueger is the main antagonist of. And basically, this was a very exciting thing for fans because it was oh my god, we could get a crossover movie. So we don't get that movie right away, but we get a movie called Jason X, which is the 10th in the series. This one is basically Friday the 13th in space. Jason's captured in the beginning, and when researchers really can't figure out how to kill him, they cryogenically freeze him, and he is foolishly thawed out over 400 years later when they're in space or going to space, and they don't initially know who he is, but somebody recalls him being this mass murderer or something. This whole movie is basically the 1979 Ridley Scott film Alien, if the alien were Jason Voorhees, and if it were also immensely bad in every way. Alien is amazing. Don't fucking tell me different. Freddy vs. Jason came after that movie, and it was the long-awaited Nightmare on Elm Street crossover with Friday the 13th, making it the 11th installment for the Friday the 13th franchise and the 8th Nightmare on Elm Street installment. This one is about how folks in Springwood, aka Freddy's universe, have systematically tried to eradicate Freddy while he is in hell to basically, make people forget about him. It makes him unable to invade people's dreams like he normally does, and Freddy enlists Jason to terrorize Springwood on his behalf to make them think Freddy has returned. And this will, I guess, allow that to really happen somehow, but the police still try to cover it up because they're still trying to make people forget Freddy. So Jason starts to just do his thing, killing people, and he does it too much. And Freddy kind of gets pissed because it's like he's taking victims that Freddy could have had. And then Jason and Freddy fight in the dream world where Freddy has been living, and Freddy realizes that Jason has a fear of drowning. Eventually, Jason decapitates Freddy, and we think they both sink in this lake, but again, they pull the rug out from under us with an ending that shows that they're somehow still alive, although they're pretty fucked up. Then, for this 12th movie, we get what I would like to call a greatest hits remake, I guess. It was another one of these horror remakes that Michael Bay was a producer on because he's apparently a big horror fan. So it recreates memorable moments from the earlier Friday the 13th movies and combines them into one movie. So what happens is Jason takes out all but one in a group of campers because I guess he thinks that she looks like his late mom, and it's the story of this woman's brother trying to find her. And it's a remarkably underwhelming movie, despite production value probably being the best of the series. It's like this whole thing is a letdown. You want it to be something spectacular, but basically the series kind of ended with that mediocre remake that wasn't very well received. And so now this franchise is in limbo. It's funny. I would have thought on the surface, if I was assessing how long it would take to tell the events of Halloween's movies or Friday the 13th movies, I would have 100% thought that Friday the 13th had a way easier recap, but it's not. I think it's because there's so little continuation of a story between them. I didn't have to keep introducing people and all this stuff. All right, thank you for checking this out.